Today's topic is all this is verily Brahman. And to get us into the spirit of this Advaitic subject, we will do a meditation that was given by Swami Vivekananda when he was in the West. It's a meditation on strength. And it was at Camp Taylor in Northern California, in the Redwoods, that he trained a band of Western students in the ancient Indian rishis style. He chose the elements of nature to expand the mind and heart. One student, Ida Ansel, who passed away in our Vedanta Society of Southern California, she used to take shorthand notes of Vivekananda's talks, and she became a very, very close disciple of his. She wrote, "I close my eyes and see him, Vivekananda, standing there in the soft blackness with sparks from the blazing log fire, flying through it, and a day-old moon above." Swami said to us, "You may meditate on whatever you wish, but I shall meditate on the heart of a lion that gives strength." So let us begin, seated comfortably, but with a spine straight so that we remain alert, and with our hands held in the fashion of Vivekananda, right palm upturned, held loosely by the left upturned palm. And begin by taking in 3 deep breaths. Breathing in strength and expelling all weakness, all low, mundane thoughts. Now picture the lion in the heart. The heart is the center of our sense of identity, the center of our being. It's deep within, in the middle of the chest cavity, towards the spine. Dwell on the spiritual qualities represented by the lion. It radiates strength, fearlessness, majesty, mastery, freedom. The lion is a creature of the savannah. It has no enemies and therefore fears no one. It knows that it is a match for all circumstances. Let us feel we are established in that strength. Know you are free. Strength blazes from the eyes of the lion. It illumines our heart. It courses outward into the thought channels of our mind. Our veins, the sinews of our arms, hands, feet. Our body is filled with strength. Our mind is established in strength. We know the self, the Atman, fears nothing, not even death. We are centered in that which transcends time, space, and all that belongs to this fleeting world of matter. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this is the fourth in a series of the Svetasvatara Upanishad. If you don't have it, we have copies in our center. This one is with a translation and notes by Swami Tyagishananda, but there are also other, we have Swami Nikhilananda's translation, we have Swami Prabhavananda's translation, we have other translations as well. So those of you who are coming into this series for the first time, just a real quick review to help you get established and what we're trying to bring out in this session. This Upanishad is older than the 5th century BCE, and it is a synthesis of Vedic, Puranic, Sankhya, and yogic thought. It harmonizes both jnana and bhakti. So this is a very broad-reaching Upanishad. The word Svetasvatara means he who has white mules. And this is a metaphor for a sage who has purified his or her senses. This Upanishad was composed long before the classical Sankhya philosophy existed. The Sankhya system was founded by Kapila in the late 7th or early 6th century BCE. And though this so-called Sankhya terminology occurs infrequently in this Upanishad, such words can have several nuances, and their meanings can change over time, just as we see in the Bhagavad Gita. Purusha can mean person, or it can be used interchangeably to mean the Atman, either in a universal or individual sense. The word Prakriti appears just once, but interestingly, it occurs 21 times in the Bhagavad Gita, and yet the Gita is considered and celebrated as one of 3 cornerstones of Vedanta. So you see how these words and their meanings have changed over time. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali were compiled in the 2nd or 3rd century CE, but its systematic presentation is recognizable in the 2nd chapter of this Upanishad. So here it's important to add an aside. It's important to remember that in our Ramakrishna Vedanta tradition, adepts in these various schools, Sankhya, Yoga, Tantra, Vedanta, intermingled in the ancient Vedic times, and they shared their practices and experiences with each other. Patanjali's yoga system stood on the shoulders of Kapila's Sankhya tradition. It developed from that. And Shankara's Vedanta tradition stood on the shoulders of these 2 traditions. Osmosis. That is how these great philosophies and systems developed. These systems of philosophy developed through experimentation and osmosis. And then finally, we come to the Ramakrishna Vedanta tradition and find it standing on the shoulders of Kapila's Sankhya cosmology, techniques of mind control adopted from Patanjali's yoga system, the metaphysical principles and practices of the mantra taken from the Tantra tradition, and the lofty philosophy and rock-solid logic accepted from Shankara's Advaita Vedanta system. Sri Ramakrishna practiced and incorporated the best from all of these systems and developed a Vedanta tradition of such breadth, depth, and universality as we find in Vivekananda's complete works, specifically in his 4 yogas. Those are a must-read. Those are must-read scriptures, the 4 yogas, to show this development and synthesis within our tradition, which is a Vedanta tradition. Now, going back to the Svetasvatara Upanishad, we see elements of Shaivism in it. And we can also find those elements in the Taittiriya Upanishad, in the hymn to Rudra, as an immanent face of the universal Brahman. Non-dual Kashmir Shaivism was considered non-Vedic by Shankara because it recognizes no dichotomy of Brahman and Maya, no separation. Shiva is a single consciousness at rest and active. Maya. Vedanta views Maya as separate from Brahman. In Shaivism, it views Maya as Shiva's own self-assumed power of limitation by which he, the infinite one, experiences his creation through innumerable finite centers of consciousness, us, the individual jiva. And moksha, in Advaita Vedanta, it is attained through neti neti atma, denying this appearance of the universe and arriving at the ultimate reality. And ultimately, the empirical universe vanishes into the unitive reality of Satchidananda. In Shaivism, the approach is through iti iti, that of the Vijnani. The world does not vanish, but appears as nothing other than the singular divine consciousness. Quickly, verse 1, Svetasvatara asks big questions. Seekers of the highest knowledge ask, what is the cause of this universe? Is it Brahman? From what are we born? By what do we live? And what is our permanence? O knowers of Brahman, what laws govern us, whose lives run their course through happiness and all the rest? And in verses 2 through 5, this Upanishad describes the nature of the universe. The accepted worldview of the Chandogya Upanishad, all this universe is truly Brahman. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. From that, all things originate, and that they dissolve. By that they are sustained. In tranquility, one should meditate on that. So Brahman is the cause, the goal, and the support of the universe, the eternal subject, apart from which the universe has no existence whatsoever. Brahman can exist without Maya, but Maya cannot exist without Brahman. Svetasvatara asks the ancient question, what are the causes of the universe? Is it time? No, because time is impermanent. Is it nature? No, because nature has no inherent nature apart from this world. Is it design or chance? No. These are abstract laws created by reasons. So, elements of nature? No, they're only parts of the whole. Is it energy? No, again, because energy is part of the universe. Is it intelligence? No, because the perceiver and the perceived are both equal parts of the universe. So this cause is actually deep within all beings, you and me, hidden from sight. And then we come to this beautiful spiritual metaphor of the universe that Svetasvatara shares with us. He says this vast universe is a wheel. Upon it are all creatures that are subject to birth, death, and rebirth. Round and round it turns and never stops. It is the wheel of Brahman. Then verses 6 through 9 describe the nature of the individual and our true nature. Verse 6 says, as long as the individual self thinks it is separate from Brahman, it revolves upon the wheel in bondage to the laws of birth, death, and rebirth. But when, through the grace of Brahman, it realizes its identity with him, it revolves upon the wheel no longer. It achieves immortality. So we might ask here, how do we separate the Atman from the non-Atman? Verse 7 reveals the secret. Svetasvatara tells us, he who is realized by transcending the world of cause and effect in deep contemplation is expressly declared by the scriptures to be the supreme Brahman. Brahman is referred to as a pronoun he. He is a substance, all else the shadow. He is imperishable. The knowers of Brahman know him as the one reality behind all that seems. For this reason, they are devoted to him. Absorbed in him, they attain freedom from the wheel of birth, death, and rebirth. What is liberation? We ask. Swami Prabhupada explains, behind every one is that infinite ocean of existence, infinite ocean of knowledge and bliss. We recognize that, we realize that, we experience that. How wonderful. And we have proof of that experience in those sages who have realized that. Sri Ramakrishna says, the nectar of Satchidananda is the nectar of immortality. Dive deep. By diving deep in God, one becomes immortal. This is a strength-giving religion, and it's based on experience. In verse 8 is described our human condition, whether bound or liberated. The Lord supports this universe, Svetasvatara tells us, which is made up of the perishable and the imperishable, the manifest and the unmanifest. The individual soul, forgetful of the Lord, attaches itself to pleasure and thus is bound. When it comes to the Lord, it is freed from all fetters. Vedanta tells us that this cosmic emanation takes place through the power of Maya, Brahman's inscrutable power of avidya shakti, the power of ignorance. Maya, what is Maya? It's neither wholly real nor wholly unreal. It is dependent on Brahman and inseparable from it, just as the power to burn is inseparable from fire. That's a wonderful metaphor that we can hook our minds onto to describe this intermingling of Maya with Brahman. Another example is the snake in the rope. Due to darkness, which is symbolic of our ignorance, we mistake a snake for a rope in the road. So also this whole snake universe is superimposed upon the rope Brahman. But in samadhi, this universe vanishes, and when the jnani returns to normal consciousness, he or she knows beyond doubt this universe is a dream and negates all perceived forms. It's a tremendous interior revolution. One goes into it as a person, and one comes out of that experience a sage. It's interesting, just to give you an example, One wonderful Swami in our order, Swami Ritajananda, who became the head of the Gret Center in Paris, outside of Paris. One of our nuns visited him, I think it was in the 70s or 80s. And she thought him just sort of a normal, kind of sweet man. And then later, she heard that his heart had stopped and devotees gave up hope. But then miraculously, he returned to consciousness and was a completely different person. And when our sister went and visited him after that experience, she asked him, Swami, there's such a change in you. What happened? And he said, Sri Ramakrishna blessed me. So this is what happens. As I said, it's a radical experience. One looks to be a corpse. The heart stops. It's called kumbhaka. And at that time, the realization takes place. In verse 9, mind and matter, master and servant, both have existed from beginningless time. The Maya which unites them has also existed from beginningless time. When all three, mind, matter, and Maya, are known as one with Brahman, then is it realized that the self is infinite and has no part in action. This is a little heady, we'll deconstruct it. Then is it revealed that the self is all. In other words, in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, one realizes oneness with Brahman. Mind and matter, ego and universe disappear. There's no concept of being a distinct individual. There's just one ocean of existence, consciousness, bliss. And returning from that state, the Brahmagyani retains the strong memory of Brahman and now experiences the normal state of consciousness and the relative world differently. Another transcendental experience is when the Brahmagyani returns from Nirvikalpa Samadhi and lives in between the transcendental, the Nitya, and the lower plane of consciousness referred to as the Lila, the divine play, experiencing this world as a divine play. And that is the fluctuating state of consciousness in which Sri Ramakrishna lived. It's called Bhavamukha. Usually only an avatar has that capacity. And in this case, there are Brahmagyanis in this world. It's not the Brahmagyani's vivid samadhi memory that now reveals this world as a dream, but the Vijnani returns to experience firsthand the divinity of this universe. Completely different vision of this universe. Mind and matter are experienced as one with God, and God is experienced in everyone and everything. Forms are experienced as pulsations of consciousness. So if Sri Ramakrishna were to meet you, he would see you as a pulsation of consciousness. So there is an important distinction between the Brahmagyani and the Vijnani, and both are sages who live in this world today, and they remain hidden. The Brahmagyani sees the subtle duality. Brahman is experienced within all forms, which of themselves are unreal and are therefore something to be negated. See? But the Vijnani sees the reality of Brahman as all forms, not in all forms. And Svetasvatara had that experience of Vijnana. He saw this manifold universe as a Vijnani would. Now we come to verse 10. Matter is perishable, Svetasvatara tells us, the Lord is the destroyer of ignorance. Shiva, or Ishvara, is imperishable, immortal. He is the one God, the Lord of the perishable and of all souls. By meditating upon him, by identifying oneself with him, one ceases to be ignorant. So mind and matter are both Brahman in this experience. But matter, the form that you and I see, is perishable because it changes every moment. This whole universe of mind and matter is in a constant state of flux. It's perishable. But Brahman, which is the ground of all, is the imperishable, unchanging reality. And although our human lives are always in a state of flux, the imperishable Brahman, the unchanging constant, abides within every human heart as the Atman. The purpose of all of our spiritual practices is to recognize our identity with that Atman. My teacher used to say it's like walking, a robber, walking over the ground where the treasure lies buried, just underneath. It's so near, but we have to dig to get to that treasure. In the Bhagavad Gita, 6th chapter, verse 29, Sri Krishna reveals, his heart is with Brahman. His eye in all things sees only Brahman equally present, knows his own Atman in every creature and all creation within that Atman. What an unfathomable experience. When we no longer falsely identify with our psychophysical being, our body, personality, habits, possessions, interests, then our consciousness is no longer confined by these attributes, these limitations. Our consciousness expands. We can then see our Atman in every creature and all creation within it. Once we have the experience of the Atman within, we have the experience of the Atman within all. As Christ said, love thy neighbor as thyself, because our neighbor is truly our very self. In this verse, Svetasvatara prescribes a threefold sadhana. Constant meditation infused with longing. In other words, holding fast to the ideal and at last becoming identified with the self. Now, what is constant meditation? What does that mean? Does that mean we meditate 24 hours a day? Is that meditation? Swami Brahmananda explained how meditation has progressive stages. He said, higher than ritualistic worship is the worship of God with prayer and japam. Now, japam is a repetition of the name of God. Okay? That is prayer. By this means, the aspirant prays and chants and meditates upon the shining form of his chosen ideal within his own heart. He's talking to his monks here. Then it goes on. Higher still is meditation. When a man practices this form of worship, he keeps up a constant flow of thought toward God and becomes absorbed in the living presence of his chosen ideal. He goes beyond prayer and japam, but the sense of duality remains. So we use the word meditation very loosely. We say, I'm going to meditate. No, meditation is unbroken thought of God, like oil being poured from one vessel to another. Then Brahmananda goes on to say, the highest method of worship is meditation on the unity of the Atman and Brahman. This leads directly and immediately to God. The aspirant experiences Brahman. He knows that God is. It is an actual realization of the omnipresent reality. But then he gives a cautionary note. These are the different stages, he says, through which the aspirant progresses. It is of vital importance that a man begins his spiritual journey from where he is. If an average man is instructed to meditate on his union with the absolute Brahman, he will not understand. He will neither grasp the truth of it, nor will he be able to follow the instructions. So in other words, we begin where we are. We do not have the sadhana behind us to jump to the top of the roof. Svetasvatara expressed constant meditation as infused with longing. So what is this longing? How important is it, and what exactly is it? I might think that I'm longing for God, but is that the longing he's talking about? Sri Ramakrishna explained with a vivid and unforgettable example. An aspirant asked his teacher, what is the way to attain God? And the teacher took the disciple to a nearby pond, and without a word, he held the disciple's head underwater. After a few moments, he released the disciple's head, and the disciple came up, choking and gasping for breath. The disciple was astonished, but the teacher smiled and said, well, how did it feel? I felt as if I was dying. The teacher said, when you can long for God with the same intensity as you long for that breath of air, you'll surely attain him. That is spiritual longing. It hurts. But when we start reading the lives of the great mystics in all the religious traditions of the world, we find that that longing is there. That one-pointedness develops through sadhana, spiritual practice. So how do we hold fast to the ideal? How and why? Swami Brahmananda. A certain length of time should be given to the practices of meditation, japam, and study every day. Whether you like it or not, follow your routine regularly. And oftentimes we don't like it. The mind just wants to rebel. By so doing, he goes on, you will gradually create a permanent habit. Perhaps now you do not enjoy meditation, but as you perform the habit, you will come to the point where you will actually feel unhappy if you do not meditate. So that is a sign of progress. When you reach this stage, he said, you will know that you have advanced along the spiritual path. Verse 11. Know God and all fetters will be loosed. Ignorance will vanish. Birth, death, and rebirth will be no more. Meditate upon him and transcend physical consciousness. Thus will you reach the union with the Lord of the universe. Thus will you become identified with him, who is one without a second. In him, all your desires will find fulfillment. So what are these fetters? Svetasvatara is alluding to. Patanjali defines them as the 5 pain-bearing obstructions: ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life. Ignorance is mistaking the unreal for the real. This body as I. Egoism is a sense of separation. We're not talking about egotism. We're talking about egoism, the ego, sense that the I is separate from you. Attachment and aversion, craving and hatred, strong likes and dislikes disturb our mind's balance. And when the mind is disturbed, this calm lake is ruffled by waves of hatred and enjoyment. We cannot see the Atman lying on the bed of the lake, clinging to life. Well, we all have a fear of death. That's only natural. It reminds me of a German devotee. She was a staunch devotee. She was German, Elfrieda, in our Santa Barbara Center. She was a little imbalanced. She'd gone through World War II, and it had imbalanced her mind, but she was also very psychic. She knew what we in the convent needed before we even asked, and would bring it to the temple as an offering on the very day we needed it. It was extraordinary. But because she suffered from mental illness, she often complained to us that she just wanted to die. Well, one day, I remember in Santa Barbara on the side of a mountain, one day as she left the convent in her car, her brakes gave out on Ladera Lane, the lane that led up to the temple and convent. It was a steep lane leading from the temple down to a cross street far below. And her car careened across the cross street and ended up in a neighbor's yard. And as soon as some of us reached her, she cried out in fright. "I could have died instantly," she said. Such is the nature of this clinging to life, no matter how much we tell ourselves and others that we long to die. Sri Ramakrishna described the 8 fetters according to the tantric scriptures: hatred, shame, fear, distrust or hesitation, arrogance of ancestry or caste, preoccupation with one's own good conduct, secrecy, grief. Sri Ramakrishna said, "One cannot succeed in spiritual life if one has shame, hatred, or fear." He said, after realizing God, a man becomes like a child, 5 years old. The ego of such a man may be called the ego of a child or the ripe ego. The child is not under the control of any of the gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas. Again, you see him wearing a beautiful piece of cloth worth 5 rupees. After a few moments, the cloth lies on the ground. He forgets all about it. A child has no pride of caste or family. A child is beyond all ideas of purity or impurity. He is not bound by social conventions. So that is the ideal, to become like a child in that sense. The greatest bondage is this body consciousness. How to transcend it? The sages tell us, by loving God, we forget the body. All our desires vanish in the fullness of his blissful presence. Ananda. Verse 12. The truth is that you are always united with the Lord, but you must know this. Nothing further is there to know. Meditate, and you will realize that mind, matter, and Maya, the power which unites mind and matter, are but 3 aspects of Brahman, the one reality. So the sage Svetasvatara tells us we must know this. And by this is meant not anything external, but the pure essence of one's being, ever present and ready to be realized within. And every time we go to meditate, we are reminded of this, because where do we meditate? We meditate within the heart. Right within us, that treasure lies. The Mundaka Upanishad tells us this self is nearer than the nearest. An ordinary jiva identifies with all that is not self, my body, my intellect, my possessions, my family, my career. But when we awaken, we realize the true nature of everything experienced is Brahman. The enjoyer, objects of enjoyment, and Ishvara are all Brahman. Shankara said, a true yogi is like a fire of live coals, which is free from smoke and a crackling sound. In other words, free from desires and imaginings. A beautiful example is given of Totapuri. He was born a non-dualist and was Sri Ramakrishna's teacher of Advaita Vedanta, which Sri Ramakrishna, his student, attained in 3 days and went on to live 6 months in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. But thereafter, Sri Ramakrishna also remained a devotee of the Divine Mother and would pray and clap his hands in her praise, which Totapuri used to ridicule. But then Totapuri underwent a severe attack of dysentery. And one night, the pain became so excruciating, he could no longer meditate in Brahman. He realized his body had become an obstacle, so he decided to drown himself in the Ganges. And he walked into the river. But lo, he ended up walking all the way to the other bank. It's inconceivable, but this actually happened. And he was standing dumbfounded on the other bank of the Ganges. He looked back across the water, and suddenly he saw everywhere the presence of the Divine Mother. She was in everything, the water, the land. She was body and mind. She was pain and comfort, knowledge and ignorance. She was life and death. Without her grace, no one can go beyond her realm. No one has free will, not even to die. Yet again, beyond body and mind, she resides in her transcendental, absolute aspect as the Brahman that Totapuri had unknowingly been worshiping all his life. So he had a deeper fruition of his non-dual experience by the experience of the Divine Mother. He returned to Dakshineshwar and spent the remaining hours of the night meditating on the Divine Mother. And in the morning, he went to the Kali temple with Sri Ramakrishna, prostrated before the image of Mother Kali. Having realized why he had spent 11 months at Dakshineshwar, he bid Sri Ramakrishna farewell and left, further enlightened. So what does this mean for us? We who are struggling to realize God. My teacher used to say, the truth is you are always united with God. Try to feel this. You can never be separated from God. You can't think, act, even move a little finger without the power of God. So you are always united with the Lord, but you must know this. That is the whole of spiritual life, what you are. Know that. Alfred Lord Tennyson, in his poem, The Higher Pantheism, wrote, "Speak to him, thou, for he hears, and spirit with spirit can meet. Closer is he than breathing, and nearer than hands and feet." Just to think of this gives us a thrill. Verse 13. Fire, though present in the fire sticks, is not perceived until one stick is rubbed against another. The self is like that fire. It is realized in the body by meditation on the syllable Om. So here, meditation is likened to kindling a fire. So this fire lies latent in wood, just as the self is unperceived by ordinary consciousness. And by friction of concentration and meditation on the mantra Om, the mind's sensory impressions are subdued and the self stands revealed. In the Mandukya Upanishad, we read the syllable Om, which is the imperishable Brahman, is the universe. Whatsoever has existed, whatsoever exists, whatsoever shall exist hereafter is Om. And whatsoever transcends past, present, and future, that also is Om. Now, the technical word for Om is pranava, which means sounding, reverberating. And this refers to the vibration of consciousness itself. It cannot be heard by the physical ears, but it can be heard by yogins' inner ear, described as anahata, the unstruck sound. Once at Bellarmine in the evening, monks were gathered in the room of Swami Shantananda, disciple of Holy Mother. And his room was, if you're approaching the President Maharaja's quarters, was in one of those rooms to the right. And they were reading from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna was describing the anahata, which he said, it is a spontaneous sound constantly going on by itself. It is the sound of the pranava, Om. It originates in the Supreme Brahman and is heard by yogis. People immersed in worldliness do not hear it. A yogi alone knows that this sound originates both from his navel and from the Supreme Brahman, resting on the ocean of milk. And the monks turned to Swami Shantananda and said, is it really possible to hear this anahata? And the Swami answered quietly, yes, I'm hearing it now. Verse 14. Let your body be the stick that is rubbed, the sacred syllable Om, the stick that is rubbed against it. Thus shall you realize God, who is hidden within the body, as fire is hidden within the wood. So these two sticks represent consciousness. The lower stick is the body, embodied finite human consciousness, and the upper stick, Om, the divine consciousness. This previous sloka was dealing with theory. This sloka emphasizes practice. Shankara points out that Patanjali defines practice in the Yoga Sutras, chapter 1, verse 13 and 14, as a continuous struggle to keep the mind in a state of perfect restraint. Verse 13, continuous struggle to keep the vrittis restrained is abhyasa. In Sutra 14, it becomes firmly grounded by long, constant efforts with great love and devotion. So this practice, when coupled with bhakti, love for the goal, remains continuous. And when accompanied by vairagya, renunciation, it is unwavering. Sri Ramakrishna said, bhakti, love of God, is the essence of all spiritual disciplines. Through love, one acquires renunciation and discrimination naturally. Then we might ask, what is this Om? What is its power? Sri Ramakrishna said, the sound Om is Brahman. The rishis and sages practiced austerity to realize that sound Brahman. After attaining perfection, one hears the sound of this eternal word. What will you gain, some sages asked, by merely hearing the sound? Sri Ramakrishna then explained, you hear the roar of the ocean from a distance. By following the roar, you can reach the ocean. As long as there is the roar, there must be the ocean. By following the train of Om, you attain Brahman, of which the word is the symbol. That Brahman has been described by the Vedas as the ultimate goal. But such vision is not possible as long as you are conscious of your ego. A man realizes Brahman only when he feels neither I nor you, neither one nor many. Self-realization is explained by illustrations. And we see this in verses 15 and 16. Svetasvatara tells us, like oil in sesame seeds, butter in cream, water in the riverbed, fire in tinder, the self dwells within the soul. Realize him through truthfulness and meditation. Like butter in cream is the self in everything. Knowledge of the self is gained through meditation. The self is Brahman. By Brahman is all ignorance destroyed. So Brahman, as it were, destroys ignorance. The sages tell us. And that is when the aspirant feels the grace of God. It is tangibly experienced, but self-effort is needed. So the illustrations are, oil is extracted from sesame seeds by pressing it. Butter is obtained from cream by churning it. Water springs upward from the dry riverbed by shoveling away the dirt. So the self is realized by first recognizing and negating our false self, our physical, mental, and causal sheaths that veil the Atman. It takes work. Affirming and actualizing our true nature by meditating on the self within, by practicing truthfulness, satya, which encompasses truthfulness, honesty, goodness, and stems from the ultimate reality, sat, existence itself. We cannot realize Sat without Satya. Swami Brahmananda reminds us of the outcome of all such spiritual practice. If you take one step toward God, he comes 100 steps towards you. What is that like? My teacher used to say, though you are trying to concentrate, to meditate, and worship day by day, you think you have not grown and that you are getting nowhere. We all feel like this. Then suddenly, when you are least expecting, you feel a power within yourself and around you. That's how it draws and lifts you up, and the darkness vanishes. The light shines. So, dear friends, let us meditate on the pranava Om. Get a comfortable seat with spine straight. Close your eyes and deeply breathe in and out 4 times to calm the mind. Move your attention from the eyes to the nose. Then from the nose to the mouth. And from the mouth to the heart. There are no thoughts or images in the heart. Let go of all worries in the heart. Pay attention to your breath, breathing in and breathing out. Observe your breath. Is it long or short? Fast or slow? Moist or dry? Relax your head, your ears, your neck, shoulders, and back. Relax every cell in your body and make every cell smile. From your mystic heart, deep within, arises the pranava Om. Observe how it flows and feeds every cell in your body with its vibration. Feel every cell in your body is vibrating with the sound Om. Quietly listen to the cells of your body vibrating with the pranava Om. Observe how it arises from silence and returns to silence. Listen as the pranava Om arises from your heart and touches the sun, the stars, the sky, the earth, all now vibrating with the sound Om. Listen quietly without stressing or straining as the pranava Om vibrates within and throughout the universe, in the wind, the earth, the plants and trees, pervading every cell of your body and being, all pervading, all in harmony. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace.